Welcome to Veronica Live, and we are here with my next guest, and he just wrote a book that's dropped that you can find on Amazon. His name is Tevi Troy. He's the author of The Power and the Money, the epic clashes between commanders and chiefs and titans of industry. And you're a senior fellow at the Bipartisan Policy Center. You're a senior scholar at Yeshiva University. You're a best-selling presidential historian. You've worked for some of the greats, for George Bush. Welcome, Tevi, to Veronica Live.
Yeah, thanks. I got a lot going on, but thrilled to talk about The Power of Money with you guys today.
Well, I got the book late, which the book is excellent, though. I mean,
Thank you.
That's the thing. People forget that our government and these rich CEOs, they're trying to scratch each other's back. So let's start there. How did you end up writing this book? And you start from the beginning, from like early CEOs with our early presidents, and you kind of go through all of them.
Yeah, you're right. I do start with John D. Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan and the early days of corporations in America. I am a presidential historian. I've also worked in the White House, as you noted, and I write books. This is my fifth book about presidents and blank, something that no one has covered before with respect to the presidency, but also something that speaks to our current moment. And I thought this idea of presidents and CEOs is really resonant right now because you have both parties, Democrats and Republicans, seem to hate CEOs, yet CEOs are everywhere. They have more power over us than ever before. They have more money than ever before. Even John D. Rockefeller didn't have as much money as Elon Musk does today. And it would seem like a perfect combination of my interest in presidents, but also my interest in using presidential history to provide some social commentary.
Well, and why do they need each other? That's my first question. Why does a rich CEO need a president? Explain that to us.
Sure, there's a whole bunch of reasons. Number one is there's the loneliness of leadership. Both CEOs and presidents are at the top of their organizations, at the top of their game, and they feel like no one is at their level. So I talk about a CEO like Lew Wasserman, who was a big Hollywood mogul, and Lyndon Johnson felt like few people could relate to him, but Wasserman could because he understood what it was like to be at the pinnacle of power. And they would spend nights up till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning talking in the White House because Johnson could relate to Wasserman. And I think that's one reason. But there's also all kinds of other reasons, political advantages to being the CEO. Sometimes CEOs have provided staff for presidents. They provide money for presidents. They provide validation that the economy is going well. And then on the other side, the CEOs can get all kinds of favors from presidents. They get good PR from being photographed with presidents. And they also can potentially get subsidies or even contracts from working closely with government.
Well, and one of you mentioned so many people, and so I read the last chapter, which was very intriguing to me, the big tech domination, because Zuckerberg now is trying to butter us up because he had buttered up, Obama, and he came out last week saying, "Oh, I had to suppress stuff for the White House," and we all were like we didn't know. We knew, let me tell you. And
yeah, all of a sudden. Right?
Why do you think all of a sudden now he's like, is he seeing the writing on the wall that it's going to be Trump, and he's trying to massage that because he is such a power player in the world?
Well, yeah, it's a good question, and it would be the first time. I write in the book that the first time Zuckerberg interacted with the president was when he had George W. Bush, post-presidency, come to Facebook headquarters to publicize Bush's memoir. And this is right after the Republicans had taken over Congress in 2010. And so Zuckerberg is trying to curry favor with Republicans by bringing George W. Bush in for a book talk. So I think Zuckerberg is very aware of Washington and how it can have implications for his business. In fact, his mentor was Bill Gates. And Bill Gates early on, Bill Gates had been burned by Washington with the antitrust case in the 1990s. Bill Gates said to Zuckerberg, "Get an office there now." And by there, he meant Washington, D.C.
Right. And one of the other power players that seems to always show up is Oprah. And she's been there for darling Obama. And then she was just there at the DNC in her lovely purple dress. And then it's funny because you mentioned in the book how, she used to be friends with Donald Trump. So talk about the power of Oprah, because she brings that Hollywood dynamic, which is another kind of idea that you bring, to the table, because these Hollywood people have so much money.
Right. And I mentioned Oprah in the book because she's kind of a reverse CEO. A lot of these CEOs develop a huge company and a lot of money, and then they buy a platform, like Henry Ford buying the Dearborn Independent newspaper. But Oprah has the platform first, and then she becomes CEO of this media empire. And for the first 20 years of her show, she was very careful to avoid politics. In fact, when she befriended Trump and when she had Trump on the show, Trump was not in the political game. But it's only in the 2000 election, when she has both Bush and Gore over, she realized her political power. And then in 2008, she endorses Obama, first time she endorsed a candidate. And that has a huge impact on Obama, and she's been pretty much endorsing Democrats ever since.
And then not Zuckerberg, Elon Musk is mentioned a lot, and he seems to be, I mean, he is just such a power player. I think, you know, I've been saying this since he bought Twitter, aka X, that he's the founding father of modern day free speech, and he's so integral, you know, aligning with the government. I mean, when we had Ukraine, what was it called, John? The link that he had over there that they were using for warfare?
The Starlink. Yeah, Starlink. Yeah.
So
why Musk is an interesting hybrid, though, because he is a creature of government. Because, you know, SpaceX, you know, who's their customer? The government. You know, Tesla, where do they get their money from? Government credits, you know, government energy credits. You know, because he's made his money, you know, through government loans, through government, you know, using government. And yet he has all this power, you know, that it's kind of a strange. To me, Musk is separate than a Zuckerberg, who made his money outside of government.
Yeah, John, you're totally right. And I do point this out in The Power and the Money, that the Obama administration is the administration that makes Musk. You do have those green credits that go to help build Tesla, and Obama goes to visit Musk at SpaceX in Florida, and that's a huge boost for that platform. So Musk really is developed by Democratic administrations. And to this day, even though he's endorsed Trump for 24, he still has never voted for a Republican for president. He probably will in November this time. But he voted for Biden in 20 and Hillary in 2016 and Obama, of course, in 2012. So Musk is an interesting creature because he's made by Democrats. But then when he goes all in on free speech and he buys X, suddenly the Democrats and the left in general are not big fans of him anymore, and he turns around and he's going in a different direction.
Well, one of the facts that you mentioned, which the number blew my mind, was in the beginning of the book. You talk about how every year $3 billion, $3 billion with a B, is spent on lobbying. I need to be a lobbyist, everybody. So is that not? That's just incredible, that amount of money that is spent for folks to have things go their way.
Well, you're right. There is a lot of money spent on lobbying. But what I point out in The Power and the Money is that if there are two companies or two industries that are in conflict with each other, they're pretty much going to come to a wash in terms of how much they spend on lobbying. You're not going to have one massively outspend the other. But that's why CEOs are so important. And they can actually be the tiebreaker. They could be the thumb on the scale, because a CEO who's willing to engage with Washington can get more done than your average lobbyist, and can have a relationship with a president that can help determine the fate of an industry. And that's what I get at in The Power and the Money.
Well, and you also, you talk about, all these CEOs. Do you have a favorite CEO that you know, because you've researched them all? Is there anybody that stands out more to you?
Well, the first thing is that I don't put any boring ones in The Power and the Money. I only put the most interesting and make it into the book. But Lou Wasserman is my favorite. He was a Hollywood mogul. He had no interest in Washington. He had all these cool rules for how his agents should deal with just being successful. One of them is no press interviews. He said, stay out of the spotlight, save your suit. So I think it's a great line. But then Robert F. Kennedy's Justice Department goes after him for an antitrust violation. And he says, whoa, wait a minute, Washington can have an impact on my business. And he takes a different approach. He starts befriending presidents, first John F. Kennedy, but Kennedy is then assassinated. And then he becomes really close friends with Lyndon Johnson, and then later with Ronald Reagan. And those presidents sometimes make decisions that have real impact on his business and his industry.
You know, well, first off, say your book is excellent, and as Veronica will attest, my first rule number one, if you want to know the truth in politics, follow the money, okay? I've been saying that for a lot of years. And as a former politician, I understand it well. But it's interesting that these CEOs, they come to Washington to these hearings and they get flogged by the very people that go turn around and ask them for donations. I find that really an interesting phenomenon.
Isn't that politics, John?
Well, but they're private companies. But do they? Is that just part of the game? Everybody's kind of winking and nodding.
Yeah, it's absolutely part of the game. I think sometimes the CEOs know they're going to get nailed at these hearings. But also, if you develop good enough relations with politicians, sometimes they won't hit you as hard. And I think the politicians are conscious of the fact that they have to make money from contributions. The other thing is, you said the rule is follow the money, and it's a good rule. But I think after my book, I think the rule should be follow the power and the money.
There you go. Okay, my favorite part of the book was the jokes. And I just want to read two of them. One was on J.P. Morgan. Upon learning that Theodore Roosevelt would be going on safari in Africa, hoped the lions would perform their duty. And so that was so cute. And it's just the cutest book. And then you've got one on Elon Musk. If Elon Musk's space company establishes a Mars colony and you have a girlfriend on Mars but later break up because of the long distance, she'd be your SpaceX. And so I just was giggling as I read all of these jokes. So the book is really fun. What made you do that? I guess you've been hearing these jokes as you were researching all these CEOs.
Yeah, well, in all of my books, I try and provide an appendix that's interesting and fun. And some people have said, like you guys, that just the appendix alone is worth the price of the book, the power of the money. So that's one of the reasons. But I just thought the jokes kind of encapsulated something about how the CEOs are so well known that they are worthy of being joked about, right? You can't have a joke about somebody that nobody knows. But the fact that the CEOs are universally known means that you can have these jokes about them. And the fact that Henry Ford goes into the White House to meet with Woodrow Wilson and trying to warm him up, charm him by telling Henry Ford jokes was really astounding to me. And I think it just showed the power of humor to show what society is focused on at a given moment.
So who do you think the most famous CEO is? I think Musk now, and Zuckerberg to me, or do you think in their time these other ones were just as famous?
I would say that Musk is probably the most famous CEO right now, and given population and Twitter and social media, perhaps the most famous ever. But I think the most iconic one is John D. Rockefeller. I think he's just the best known. His name has lasted for the longest amount of time. At the time, Rockefeller was a thing. I mean, you just said he's like a Rockefeller, to mention a rich person. So Rockefeller, I think, was incredibly well known, and his name has stood the test of time. Let's see if in 2100 we're still talking about the name Elon Musk.
Well, I wanted to ask you, too, because you have been a power player, and, you were deputy secretary at HHS for a couple of years. You've overseen a lot of people and billions of dollars yourself. You've worked for Senator John Ashcroft, Elaine Chao, and George W. Bush, and I guess Trump, too. What are your takeaways from these leaders? Because these are all well-known people.
Yeah, and they're all very conscious of the role that business plays. I remember having a conversation with John Ashcroft about lobbyists, and I said something kind of sarcastic, and he said, don't disparage lobbyists because they have an important role in the process. I don't listen to everything they say. I don't do necessarily everything they say, but I learn from them, and I'm learning things that you wouldn't pick up in the newspapers that don't represent the lobbyist position at all, and they don't represented by the liberal interest groups. They give you actual information. And you can either discount it or use it, but that means they're useful. The other thing I learned from Elaine Chao is she said is business is an ally when it wants to be, but you can't count on them in the foxhole when the fighting gets heavy. So I learned kind of about the inconstancy of business from Elaine Chao, and that was 20 plus years ago. Idea's been percolating in my head the whole time while I thought of this book.
And what about George Bush and Trump? We got to hear about working for those two.
Right. Well, I didn't work for Trump. I did work for George W. Bush. And Bush would have CEOs over in the White House. I sat in on many of those meetings. Sometimes he recognized that you need CEOs CEOs, and you need business, the private sector, to get things done. They were very helpful in our flu planning, for example, in the Bush days. But also, Bush was trying to address the problem of obesity. He brought in the snack CEOs and the CEOs of the fast food companies to see what they could do to try and address the obesity problem. I thought that was a fascinating meeting. So I think Bush had a healthy understanding that government couldn't do everything, and you needed to leverage the private sector to get some stuff done as well.
So that kind of brings me to the subject of regulatory capture. How do you to me, it seems worse. It's almost like businesses are, and government to some degree are co-opting each other, in furtherance of this, I don't know, you want to call it, the state or what, the deep state, the swamp, whatever you want to call it. Is that just my imagination, or is that it kind of accelerating from what it was probably 30 or 40 years ago?
Heck no, it is not your imagination. The administrative state is vast and getting bigger all the time. And one of the messages of the power of the money is how the administrative state has grown over 150 years. I start in the first chapter, I call it the blank slate, because when John D. Rockefeller was operating, there were no strictures. Government had no regulatory bodies or regulations or legislation that could rein him in. And that wasn't necessarily a good thing. You do need some regulations. But now the regulations are so overwhelming that government tells a business who they can hire and where they can sell their products and what they can do with their energy and how they can advertise. So government really has a say in everything you do. So if you're a smart CEO on your first day, you need to figure out what's going on with government and how you can deal better with government to the advancement of your business.
Well, you write in the book that you've written this book for current and future CEOs. It's a guide how to engage with the powerful federal government. So I know I've got some young people in my life. I feel like I need to send them a copy of this book to prep them and grow these CEOs. Is that why you kind of wrote the book too, to help these people?
Oh, absolutely. I envision this book more than any of my other books as a business book, a book that business people could read to better understand the environment they're in, how they can be better in senior leaders in their business, whether they make the role of CEO or not, and how much of a role government has to play in what companies are trying to accomplish.
And you've researched all of these very, very successful CEOs. Is there any traits that popped out, or do they all just stand alone? Because when I was a Trump chair for our county in 2015-16, and Trump never stopped. He never stopped. The man needs 4 hours of sleep. He's a energizer bunny, and he was just go, go, go. Have you seen any traits in leadership and, the lack of sleep that some of these people don't need that make them successful?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And by the way, I teach leadership training based on my knowledge of the government and my knowledge of presidential history. That's a lesson that I call 1,600 lessons, where I talk about the characteristics that leaders need to have to be successful. And most of the people in the power of money have these things. It's about communication and understanding and willingness to work hard, and also willingness to prepare. You can't just show up on day one and say, okay, I've got all these ideas and we're going to make it happen. You have to actually think about what you're trying to accomplish and how you're going to communicate it, and who are you going to use to communicate various messages. So preparation is a really important part of the job.
Well, we know some people need to listen to our interview today on that one, Tevi. So, Tevi, how are you seeing the election in November? Because it's to me, it's the election of our lifetime to get the right person in there. And of course, I'm a Trumper. Are you feeling that way too? Somebody that has been so close to D.C. and the White House, and worked for the government at high levels.
Well, I was never one who fantasized much, but now I have a fantasy of being reincarnated as a major party presidential candidate who doesn't go through the nomination process. It's the greatest thing ever. You just show up. You don't have to raise the money. You don't have to walk through the snow to New Hampshire. You don't have to win any video.
They're trying to legalize pot here in November. Please don't tell me before you did the interview. I like it. It has been so painful, because I did ask my husband the other day. I was like, was it this painful 4 years ago? I don't remember, because to me it's just been awful, the whole thing.
But that's an interesting question, because and particularly your book, because you started back a ways, and it's a progression. There's a reason they call them progressives. Okay, and one time I years ago, I took a class on Americanism versus communism, and part of that class was about the natural cycle, political cycles over hundreds or even thousands of years, and how things always seem to come around. And to me, it's always been like this progression of we started out, and I used to say this to some of my Democrat when I was a Republican chairman here in Bay County. We'd go to colleges and discuss our differences, between Democrats and Republicans. And I would show them this timeline, I says, here on the left, you have America where it started. This was our degree of freedom, versus anarchy versus totalitarianism, all that stuff. And over time, we keep shifting towards totalitarianism. And the Democrats just want to get there faster than the Republicans are dragging us there. Is that kind of the end result of your book, that Kamala Harris is the natural next step in that progressive movement?
Well, look, you guys kindly mentioned my appendix of the jokes. I have another appendix in there about the rise of the administrative state, where I try to graphically depict how much we've had the increase in regulations, regulatory apparatuses, legislation that kind of constrain business and tell business what it can do. And I am an optimist in politics. I think that I got involved in politics and policy because I think we can make things better. So you're right, there's been a negative progression, meaning government has more and more power and limits the ability of the American people to innovate and run their businesses as they see fit. But that doesn't mean it's always going to be that way. I believe when Ronald Reagan said, I believe that for America there's always a brighter day ahead. We just need to go out there and work it to make it happen.
Well, do you think, Tevi, that Trump is going to win? Because you're closer. I mean, you know the power players and the environment. Is it going to go our way?
Look, right now I think she's on a trajectory to win, but that doesn't mean that's going to be the case from now. I mean, 4 weeks ago, everyone was convinced Trump was going to win and that Biden was never going to leave. So these things can change. We have a debate coming up, but right now I think she has the edge.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Well, the book is fabulous, and the jokes are worth the book alone. And we've been talking to Tevi Troy, and the book is The Power and the Money, and the book just dropped, Tevi. I love the book, and I appreciate you coming on Veronica Live.
Thanks so much for having me. I love this interview. I love when people read the book and can talk about it, and so you guys are doing a great job. Thank you.
All right. Well, I'm going to send it to my daughter, future CEO. So just so you know. All right. Thanks for joining Veronica Live.